I'm going to show you how I water bath canned tomatoes in their own juices. Hi guys, I'm Elissa at Moat, Cottage, Homesteading. I grow tomatoes in a small garden, so I find it useful to freeze the tomatoes ready for canning so that when I have enough, I'm able to can them up. The fact that they're frozen just means it's easier to get the skins off. I use hot water from the tap, and when it gets a bit cool, I just replace the water. To remove your tomato skins, place the frozen tomatoes into the hot water. Let them sit in there for about 30 seconds, and then the skins just slip straight off. It should be easy. If it's not easy, then maybe they need to go in a little bit longer. If you'd like to see my video on making tomato skin powder, I'll leave the link in the description below so you can make it too. I'm using my slow cooker, so I'm placing the frozen tomatoes straight into the slow cooker. You could use a cooking pot on the stovetop as well. Just make sure it's on a low temperature so that it doesn't burn. I just find the slow cooker's easier because I don't have to watch. Once the tomatoes are defrosted, I cut them in half. You could cut them into quarters, and if they were cherry tomatoes, you could leave them whole. All this liquid is tomato juice. So the amount of tomato juice you will have will depend on the variety of tomatoes that you're using. I have not added any water to this at all. Make sure you get all the tomatoes cut in half. That's it. And I'll leave that to cook down for about another hour. I've got my clean sterilised quart jars. Now I've got 7 because that's what my pressure canner takes. I'm going to add in half a teaspoon of citric acid to each jar. Now if I was doing pint jars, I'd use 1/4 teaspoon. These are brand new jars, so I haven't even checked them to make sure that they're not cracked, because that's always a good idea to check, make sure your jars don't have any cracks in them, and check the rim to make sure there's no chips out, because if there's a chip out, the lid just won't seal. So make sure you always inspect your jars, and don't forget, like I nearly did. When you're water bath canning, the jars always need to be sterilised. Not like with pressure canning where they just need to be clean, because they get to such high temperatures it will kill anything. Water bath canning, you need to make sure your jars are sterilised. I have a bowl of vinegar, a bowl with warm water and the lids, and a bowl with hot water and the rings. I've got my magnet to help me get the lids out of the hot water and the rings as well. We'll use our funnel to fill up the jars with the tomatoes. I always give my tomatoes a mix so I get equal amounts of liquid and tomatoes, so the jars are fairly even. We want 1/2 inch headspace for tomatoes. Remove any air bubbles by putting your debubbler into the jar and squeezing in, and that will remove any air bubbles. Then measure your headspace, 1/2 inch, perfect. I have a clean cloth and I just dip it into the vinegar, squeeze out the excess, and I wipe my rim and my thread clean, so that there's no food residue and the lids will seal. Then I place my lid on, center your lid on the jar, place your ring on, finger tight. 1 jar. I've got my canner set up on the stovetop. There's a dash of vinegar in there and some water. Once I put the jars in, I'll add some more water and cover the jars by 1 inch. I put the canning rack in the bottom, because you always want your jars to be on a canning rack. If you don't have a canning rack, you could use a tea towel just to get them up off the bottom so that they don't crack with the heat on the bottom of the canner. I don't have a rack to load all my jars in before I place them into the boiling water, so I just have to be very careful when I'm putting the jars into the boiling water. Make sure the water covers the jar lids by 1 inch, and when it's back up to a rolling boil, I'll place the lid on and I'll process for 1 hour and 25 minutes for either pints or quarts. At 1 hour and 25 minutes, I turned off the heat, removed the lid, and now I wait for 5 minutes, and then I can take the jars out. I'm putting the jars onto a wooden board with a tea towel on top so that they don't get a shock when they hit the cold surface, because the tea towel buffers that. You don't want to put hot jars on a cold bench, and you don't want to damage your bench either. Now we're going to leave these jars sitting here for 12 hours. Don't touch the bands, let them stay there for 12 hours, and then we can check them to make sure they've sealed properly, wash the jars, label and date them, and put them away. If you'd like to see some more canning videos, then check out our playlist at the end of this video. So that's water bath canning tomatoes in their own juice. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.